It started like any other panel debate, bright lights, sharp suits, and smirking hosts ready to steer the conversation. But what no one predicted was that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett would end the night not just as a guest but as a headline. From the first fiery exchange to the final word that stopped the show cold, America was riveted. This wasn't just political banter. It was war broadcast live. The segment was supposed to be routine, an extended special on free speech and political responsibility hosted by Piers Morgan on his internationally syndicated show. But as the countdown to broadcast ticked down, tension in the control room was already thick. Producers exchanged uneasy glances. On one side of the panel sat Jasmine Crockett, outspoken, unfiltered, and riding high off her recent congressional victories. On the other sat Piers Morgan, acerbic, confrontational, and always looking for his next viral moment. The moment the red light turned on, the fireworks began. "Congresswoman Crockett," Piers said, crossing one leg and flashing that trademark smirk, "why is it that every time I turn on the news, you're yelling at someone?" Jasmine leaned in, a slow, deliberate grin spreading. "Maybe it's because someone's always saying something stupid." The audience tensed. Laughter bubbled but quickly died down. Piers cocked his head. "So, you admit your strategy is hostility?" She didn't blink. "No, I admit my strategy is honesty. And it terrifies people like you." From that moment on, there was no turning back. Morgan pressed on. He pulled up quotes, clips, even misquoted statements, anything to knock her off balance. But Crockett wasn't flinching. Instead, she hit back harder, fact-checking him mid-sentence and dismissing his interruptions with surgical precision. "You're obsessed with soundbites, Piers," she snapped at one point. "But I live with consequences. You peddle outrage. I legislate reality." Piers tried to laugh it off, brushing invisible lint off his suit jacket. "Congresswoman, I must say, you're great television." That's when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low, steady. "And you," she said, "are done." "Idiot." The studio froze. Even the stage manager, holding the cue cards, forgot to breathe. There was no music to cut to. No commercial break scheduled. Just silence. "You're done, idiot." She didn't raise her voice, didn't yell. But the words sliced through the studio like a scalpel through glass. It wasn't anger. It was dismissal. Total, unflinching dismissal. The kind of line that doesn't invite a response, it declares the end of one. Piers' face stiffened. For the first time in the segment, his smirk vanished. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he said, the camera zooming slowly onto his tightening jaw. "I just did," Crockett replied, resting back in her chair like a boxer between rounds. It was halfway through the broadcast, and the room felt like it was holding its breath. Producers leaned in, unsure whether to cut to break or let the fire burn. The host, once in control, now found himself fumbling. "You've built your brand insulting people from safe seats," she continued, eyes locked on him. "But not today. You picked the wrong table." And yet, Piers wasn't finished. He straightened his tie, leaned toward her, and fired back. "The real question, Congresswoman, is whether you're more interested in making noise than making policy." Crockett's eyes narrowed. "The real question is whether you're more interested in gaslighting America than telling the truth." The back and forth escalated, each line sharper than the last, each jab more personal. But neither side blinked. Neither yielded. And both seemed aware millions were watching. As the debate dragged deeper into the hour, what started as political theater began turning into psychological warfare. Piers Morgan, visibly rattled, attempted to regain composure by bringing in prearranged viewer questions clearly crafted to corner Jasmine. But she wasn't having it. "Congresswoman," Piers began, reading from a card. "A viewer wants to know, how do you justify the crime rates in your district while you spend so much time on national television?" Jasmine leaned forward, resting both arms on the desk, her stare unblinking. "Let me ask your viewer this," she fired back. "How do you justify a country built on inequality pretending it's shocked by the consequences?" The crowd shifted. A few claps echoed from the audience gallery. Piers raised a hand as if to calm the room. "You didn't answer the question," he muttered. "Oh no, I answered it. You just don't like the answer." The tension in the studio thickened. The lighting seemed to dim as their voices grew colder, more direct. Morgan attempted to pivot to take the higher ground, only to find Jasmine already waiting for him there. "I bring facts," she continued. "Receipts. Records. You bring scandal disguised as concern." Piers narrowed his eyes. "You're accusing me of what, exactly?" "You know what I'm accusing you of," she said, her voice dropping a notch. "Turning pain into profit. Misinformation into merchandise. And when you run out of tricks, you bait women like me to make headlines." That line landed hard. Even the audience, conditioned to gasp and clap, remained silent. Morgan tried to smile, but his lips barely moved. So I'm the villain now? You said it, not me. Piers took a long breath and turned to camera 3, hoping to reset. Folks, he said, you're witnessing firsthand the new face of progressive politics. Loud, condescending, and quick to cry foul. Jasmine didn't even turn. You're witnessing a man who just lost control of his own show. Another audible shift in the room. The host was supposed to dominate, he was known for it. But Jasmine had flipped the entire format upside down. And she wasn't finished. You know why I'm really here, Piers? She asked suddenly, tilting her head. Because I knew you'd do this. You'd interrupt. You'd provoke. And I'd respond. Piers raised an eyebrow. And I'd expose you. Not with insults. With presence. He chuckled bitterly, trying to shrug it off. This is presence? It's more than you've ever had, she shot back. The atmosphere was now electric. Camera operators were glued to their lenses. Floor producers were waving silently behind the scenes, desperately signaling for something, anything, to bring the show back to script. But the two figures at the center weren't letting go. You think this is helping the discourse? Piers asked. This is just shouting. No, Jasmine said, standing slightly. This is clarity. You tried to play chess, but I came to flip the board. Piers instinctively leaned back. And just like that, the tables had completely turned. Jasmine wasn't just winning the argument, she was owning the entire moment. The cameras didn't need to move. The script didn't need to resume. Because the nation, watching from living rooms and break rooms and phones across the country, was locked in. Piers Morgan tried once more to wrest back control. He turned to the producers with a subtle hand motion and unspoken plea for commercial relief. But none came. The show was fully live. No delay. No buffer. Just raw airwaves feeding a boiling confrontation to millions. You're enjoying this, Piers muttered, eyes narrowing. You came here not to debate, but to perform. Jasmine didn't miss a beat. And you came to manipulate but got exposed. That line sliced deep. For the first time, Piers' voice trembled slightly as he responded. So what's your endgame here? Is this your audition for the radical left? For the spotlight? You looking for a Netflix deal or just your name trending on Twitter? Crockett stood, slowly and with purpose. Her voice sharpened, but her delivery never cracked. Let me explain something, and I want everyone watching to hear me clearly. I don't need a deal. I don't need a trend. I've got a district that sent me to fight, so I'm doing just that. Piers, now visibly annoyed, snapped, You came here pretending to have a dialogue. All you've done is hijack the show. No, Piers, she replied, stepping from behind her podium, I hijacked your narrative. There's a difference. The audience couldn't hold back anymore, scattered applause broke out, only to be shushed by the floor manager. Morgan turned red. You're making a mockery of this program. And you've made a mockery of political dialogue for years, she said. You sit there, smug, smugger than any senator I've ever faced, and you think your accent gives you authority. That triggered a sharp breath from the front row. Even Piers sat back, visibly stung. Now we're talking about accents? You're playing identity politics now? I'm playing truth, Jasmine said, her voice like a drumbeat. You provoke, you dismiss, and when someone matches your fire, you cry foul. Piers leaned in, voice low. You're one insult away from being escorted out. Jasmine locked eyes with him. No one's escorting me. Not from this stage. Not from this country. You invited me. You lit the match. And you poured gasoline, he growled. No, she said flatly. I brought the mirror. The crowd went silent again. Not from shock this time, but reflection. For a beat, nothing moved. Even the camera feed didn't cut angles. It lingered. That's when Piers reached into the pile of cue cards, his hands shaking slightly, and attempted a pivot. Let's talk about policy. Your position on defense spending. But Jasmine cut him off. No, let's talk about reality. Because this isn't about defense spending. It's about defending dignity. You bring people on here so you can play puppet master and get your soundbite of the day. She took a step forward. Well, here's your soundbite, Piers. You invited a fighter, and now you're surprised the gloves came off. Piers tried to speak. He couldn't. Not because she shouted, she didn't. But because her presence was suffocating his game. In that moment, everyone could feel it. Piers Morgan wasn't hosting this show anymore. Piers Morgan stared across the studio at Jasmine Crockett like a man trying to solve an equation with no solution. His face, usually so smug and composed, had fractured into tight nerves and forced smiles. He shuffled his cards again, more for composure than content. He wasn't reading anymore. He was surviving. You've made your point, Congresswoman, he finally said, trying to ease the temperature. But don't confuse theater for victory. You haven't answered a single policy question since you sat down. Jasmine chuckled, quiet, condescending, deliberate. You think policy is a list of bullet points on cue cards? Try walking into a housing crisis in your district, Piers. Try explaining to a mother why her water bill tripled while her kid sleeps next to a mold-covered wall. Piers scoffed. So now it's emotional manipulation? It's reality. Something you wouldn't recognize even if it were read by a teleprompter. The crowd murmured. Another shift. Morgan tried to interrupt, but Jasmine raised a hand, not yelling, not aggressive, just enough to stop him cold. Let me finish. Morgan hesitated, then lowered his eyes, almost involuntarily. You pretend to be a journalist, Jasmine said. But this isn't journalism. This is gladiator television. You set traps. You edit out complexity. And then you label resistance as radical. But I came prepared. I didn't come here to be polite, I came to be precise. You call this precise? Morgan asked, voice trembling with restrained anger. You've insulted me, dismiss this platform. I've exposed it, Jasmine interrupted. And the millions watching know it. Silence again. This wasn't just political theater anymore, it was dissection. And the host was the subject. I've had presidents sit in that chair, Piers said, trying to re-establish control. And now you've had someone unafraid to call your show what it is, she snapped. A stage for ego, not truth. He stood suddenly, voice rising. This is my show. And I'm your reckoning, she replied without missing a beat. The crew behind the cameras froze. Producers exchanged panicked looks. But it was too late. The ship had sailed and Piers Morgan, once the captain, was being dragged by the current. Do you want me to apologize for showing up with backbone? She added. Because I won't. I don't owe you comfort, Piers. You've made a career making others uncomfortable. Today you got served your own dish hot. Morgan's face was flushed. He waved off the next segment's cue, breaking protocol entirely. He was unraveling and she knew it. You think being loud makes you right, he spat. No. I think being right makes me loud. Another ripple in the crowd. Even the camera crew, despite every rule, held their focus. The moment was too volatile, too electric to look away. Then Jasmine stepped toward the camera, not the host, not the panel, but directly to the people. Let me say this clearly to every American watching, Piers Morgan doesn't get to define patriotism. He doesn't get to define civility. And he sure as hell doesn't get to decide who deserves a seat at the table. The lens pulled in close. Dead silence. She turned back to Piers. You've used this seat to shame, to bait, to bully. But not today. Today, you sat across from someone unbothered by your ratings, your resume, or your accent. She looked him in the eye, calm as a still lake. And I hope it haunts you. Morgan stood still, mouth half open, words trapped behind his tongue. Then the screen faded, no outro music, no tidy wrap-up, just the cold, breathtaking silence of a man who finally lost control of the circus he built. The silence after Jasmine's final line wasn't an accident, it was punctuation. For the first time in the show's history, the credits didn't roll over polite banter or panel laughter. They rolled over nothing but breathless stillness. Piers Morgan didn't say goodbye. He didn't thank her for coming. He simply stood there, deflated, cornered by his own format. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the floor manager whispered, "Cut." But no one moved. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She stood her ground with the same calm that had carried her through the most explosive interview of the year. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted her blazer, straightened her shoulders, and turned toward the exit without a single glance back. Piers remained by his desk, one hand on the table, staring into the middle distance. The man known for steamrolling guests, for taking pride in shouting matches and baiting breakdowns, had just been systematically unraveled. Not by rage. Not by theatrics. But by composure. In the hallway, Jasmine passed crew members frozen in awkward awe. A young intern offered a hesitant nod. She returned it with a half-smile and said quietly, "Next time, make sure the studio knows what it's bringing in." Meanwhile, back in the studio, Morgan's production team huddled in the control booth. The show's executive producer took off her headset and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "He asked for the confrontation," she muttered. "He got it." One of the assistant producers whispered, "Should we reach out to her staff?" "No," the EP replied. "She said everything she needed to say. We're not salvaging this." In the editing bay, techs began logging the footage. Every frame had weight. Every exchange would be clipped, shared, dissected. Social media would catch fire before the hour was up, but that wasn't part of the story. Jasmine didn't wait for the tweets. She didn't need applause. This story didn't end in trending hashtags or media spin. It ended in the place it started, the studio. And while Piers eventually returned to his chair and forced a brief closing monologue, the words fell flat, mechanical, empty, unconvincing. The control he once wielded like a saber now felt like a plastic prop dangling from a broken belt. I want to thank Congresswoman Crockett for joining us, he mumbled, looking off camera. But the audience wasn't buying it. No one clapped. No one smiled. Even the applause sign operator let his hand rest. And when the cameras finally shut off and the crew began unplugging lights, Piers stayed seated, still staring. Not because he was shocked by Jasmine's arguments, but because he had finally met someone immune to his tactics. Someone who didn't storm off. Someone who didn't fold. Someone who walked in knowing exactly what she came to do. Outside the studio, the night air hit Jasmine Crockett like a blessing, cool, unfiltered, honest. Her team rushed to catch up, phones buzzing in their palms with media alerts already flooding in. But Jasmine didn't break stride. You want a ride? 1-8 asked. She shook her head. I need to walk this off. There was no entourage. No triumphant speech to her followers. Just a woman, calm and steady, walking into the night after delivering a televised reckoning. Her message wasn't meant for viral clips or partisan praise. It was meant to remind America of something it had forgotten. That strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to blink. Back inside, the network was scrambling. Executives huddled in late-night meetings, trying to determine whether the segment had been a disaster or a ratings jackpot. Legal reviewed the footage frame by frame to see if anything needed to be redacted. But there was nothing. No slander. No defamation. Just unfiltered confrontation, raw, electric, and irreversible. Piers Morgan remained uncharacteristically quiet in the hours that followed. His team advised him to post a pre-written tweet. He refused. The damage wasn't the headline. It was the silence. It was the fact that, in his own domain, he'd been disarmed elegantly and without theatrics. Later that night, in a hotel room across town, Jasmine finally sat. She replayed the interview on a muted screen while sipping a lukewarm cup of tea. Her face remained still, but her eyes flickered, processing not just what happened, but how it would echo. She hadn't come to be liked. She came to be heard. The next morning, pundits on rival networks couldn't stop talking. She dismantled him without raising her voice, one commentator said. This wasn't a takedown, another added. It was a reframing of what power looks like. And that's what stuck with people. Not the insults. Not the drama. But the unwavering presence of a woman who didn't try to be louder, just smarter. Sharper. More rooted in truth. Weeks later, when a reporter asked Jasmine what she hoped viewers took away from the exchange, she replied simply, I hope they saw that being calm doesn't mean being soft. And that calling someone an idiot isn't half as bold as making sure they know they've been dismissed with evidence. She never mentioned Piers again. He, on the other hand, never booked her again. Because some interviews become episodes. Others become endings. And on that night, inside that studio, Jasmine Crockett didn't just walk off a show. She walked away having ended it without needing to raise her voice. So who was right in the end? That's for you to decide. But if you ask us, composure, truth, and dignity spoke louder than provocation ever could. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win the moment, she redefined it. Subscribe now to Icons and Legends, and don't forget to like, comment, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. God bless you and God bless America.